I'd like to ask a follow-up on your question about decision makers. I happen to be one of them at one point. Just to preface this by saying I've been on these standing committees, so it's interesting what's happening here.
Former senator.
I'm a former senator, so I don't have to simulate. I know what it's like. Anyway, I think that these appointments have always been politically motivated. Certainly when I was on it, it was the time when communism was in its heyday in Europe, and anybody who claimed persecution by the communists automatically got in, although we managed to make some of them review them. So it's highly political. What my question is, how do you propose to change that process? And related to that is, what resources are available to decision makers in terms of what they know about the country of origin? I mean, is there any library? Are there any people there who are knowledgeable? Or where do they get their information about what's happening in Kenya?
I'll let, I think Gloria talk about the sources of information that are available. Obviously, Amnesty is one of them. On the issue of decision makers and appointments to the IRB, there are a variety of ideas that have been floated over the years in attempts to insulate that decision making from political considerations. I'm not deeply involved in the advocacy that's done on that appointments, but my understanding is that there is at least a front-end merit-based selection process that some have said is reasonably solid. But the problem is that then a list of people is given to the minister for the final decision. That list of people, as I understand the process, and my friends can correct me, will contain a range of people, all of whom have at least met the basic criteria, but then the final decision is political. So removing that final decision, the power for that final decision from the minister, to me, makes good sense. There should be an arm's length committee that makes that decision, perhaps chaired by the chair of the Immigration and Refugee Board, with submissions from counsel, from the people who actually appear before these people. I think there are ways to insulate it. In this bill, one of the proposals is to maintain governor and council appointments to the appeal board, but there would be civil servants making first level decisions. We have obviously a whole raft of concerns there as well, but the one positive element there is that at least they're not going to be, or they may not be, clear political appointments. So maybe there are ways with civil servants as well that could actually work. The problem is right now the bill doesn't address any of that. It leaves it wide open to continued political manipulation.
With respect to the resources that are available to board members, I think one of the important things to say is that for all of its flaws, Canada does have an Immigration and Refugee Board, and particularly a research unit within the Immigration and Refugee Board that's recognized as being one of the better ones in the world. And so there are resources available to members of the Immigration and Refugee Board should they choose to use them, and should they not use them selectively. I would say that there's robust information available that all decision makers do have access to, and it's not a question of a lack of information, it's how you choose to use it and what kind of bias you might bring when you're looking for information. Any good researcher knows that you use everything that you can find that's credible and reliable, and whether or not the decision makers do is up to them.
Do you have further?
I was just going to ask, has Amnesty ever been consulted about what's going on with the situation in a particular country? Are you on
by the Immigration and Refugee Board?
Yeah, are you on the list of resources?
Yes, I mean our resources are a standard part of a package of documentation package on all countries. Occasionally, researchers within the Immigration and Refugee Board come to Amnesty asking questions on particular aspects of countries that are not available in public documentation. On a regular basis, we're not consulted.
No, but counsel do come to Amnesty regularly. So where we have a case that raises issues that don't appear to be all that well documented, where I have one, I call Gloria and ask her what Amnesty's position is and where to get the evidence. So Amnesty's been extremely helpful.
I have a second question. You mentioned that the bill is waiting on the regulations and none of us know what that's going to be. What's been the past practice of, just for the information people here, in terms of a bill coming into Parliament and then regulations? Who has input into that, and how long does it usually take? And what difference does it make in the legislation?
In terms of what difference it makes in the legislation, it depends on the bill, of course. This is skeleton legislation. This bill gives a huge amount of leeway to the regulations. Regulations, I know you know all this, but thank you for the question.
But I'm asking it.
Yeah, exactly. Regulations do not go through the process normally of approval by the standing committee and a vote in the legislature. They are sometimes subjected to some scrutiny, but in general, it's one way, if you're being devious, to pass laws that avoid proper legislative scrutiny. So that the fact that so much is left to regulations and so much is left to ministerial discretion in this bill is probably the major theme and major consideration that we have.
If I may say, it's not just the regulations,
No.
it's the rules of the Immigration and Refugee Board itself. Specifically, a lot will be actually contained in those rules, which will come much later in the process.
One more minute. Somebody mentioned the violation of the international covenants that Canada has signed. I mean, we're marvelous Boy Scouts International to sign anything, and then we don't pass the domestic legislation we implement. For your information, and this is a faint hope, but we need all the faint hopes that there are. There is a standing committee of the Senate now on human rights. I was there when it was established, and it's not to take pot shots at Bolivia and Colombia. It's to call Canada to accountability about our own record.
I'll just mention that I think today Luis Arriaga, a well-known human rights advocate from Mexico, came to Canada and is appearing before the Human Rights Committee next week, or this week. And they've invited the Immigration Committee to be there as well, in part because we need them to hear these issues.
See, you can sometimes even get good news here.